Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. The day we wait for all year is just around the corner, which makes tonight a proverbial witching hour leading up to the greatest terrorific fun of all, Halloween. So, lock your doors and hide your children. This one will steal the youth right out from under your nose. Salem's Misery.
"I want to tell you a story," I said to my friends, encompassed by the glow of a campfire with the inky dark just waiting to invade. I was camping out with my two buddies, Jason and Doug, deep inside Salem Forest, just outside its corresponding village. We were all 17 and would camp out often in the summer, avoiding our parents so we could smoke weed and drink our pilfered alcohol. Although we always would share funny and spooky stories, many related to our quaint little town, that night I told them a story that my father had only told me on the Saturday night merely 2 weeks prior. At first, I thought it was just a story to scare me while I was out here with my friends. But I was dead wrong. "There are records of the Salem witch trials, this is true," I began. "But not all people of that time are accounted for in those records. Rose was born in the late 1680s. Her family lived on the outskirts of town, but before Rose was 6 years old, both her parents and sister had died from disease. Rose was orphaned and sent to live with a more financially stable couple on the other side of Salem. Although the Baileys were kind to Rose at first, they were unable to understand her. Rose was born special. She claimed to be able to speak to trees and see future events. The passing of events affirming her premonitions only furthered the Baileys' miscomprehension of their adopted daughter. They knew that in light of the ongoing witch trials that Rose would immediately be targeted. They hid her from sight, keeping her busy with chores. These chores usually involved the use of the sewing spindle. Maybe it was the isolation, maybe the girl knew what was coming. But as days passed, her episodes proceeded to get more violent and intense. She would shake and scream at the top of her lungs in agony. Eyes rolled deep into the back of her skull. Sometimes she would collapse on the floor, but more frequently she would thrash about whatever room she was in, swinging her fists violently at seemingly nothing, desperately trying to get free of something unseen. The Baileys eventually had no choice. They had to ask for help. Unfortunately for Rose, this inevitably led to her trial by the church. However, Rose was not convicted of witchcraft. The Baileys, unsupportive of the witch trials, declared their daughter mentally incompetent and were awarded the ability to speak on Rose's behalf. The Baileys spun a story that involved the accusation of 3 young girls of witchcraft, all from the village. Rose tried to deny her parents' falsities, but the declaration of mental incapability rendered her arguments invalid. Rose was acquitted of all charges and released back into the Baileys' custody. Unfortunately, the 3 young girls were convicted and hanged. Rose would spend 3 more years in her house, doing her step-parents' bidding, all the while resenting them for their selfish actions. Early one morning, just before sunrise, Rose crept from her parents' house undetected and ran to the church to make confession. She just couldn't live with the guilt anymore. As far as she was concerned, her hands were stained with blood as well. The Baileys awoke to a vacant home and went into town to look for the girl. They were promptly informed that she was at the church, causing quite a commotion with all kinds of accusations. The Baileys then went to the church. No one knows exactly what was said or the entirety of the events, as this is where the records end. There's a birth certificate for Rose, but no death certificate exists. Legend has it that her parents once again wove another false story to avoid retribution themselves. It's said that they then accused their daughter of witchcraft. It has been passed down through the generations that Rose was seen running from the church while being pursued by a group of about 10 to 15 people, chasing her deep into the woods west of Salem. No one ever told of what happened to Rose, whether she was hanged, burned, or simply avoided capture. But Rose was never seen again. It is believed by many that Rose did indeed die that day, but her close connection with nature granted her a kind of refuge by keeping her spirit within the trees of the forest. Now, it's said that on black, crisp, silent nights such as these, if you listen really close, the trample of footsteps can be heard running through the forest. Sometimes, the screams of a young girl can be heard coming from deep within the woods. And last but not least, don't ever. "Ha!" I screamed at my two friends at the end of the story to give them a startle. It had worked on Doug, who nearly fell off the log he was sitting on, while Jason just stared at me with a smirk, shaking his head. "Nice try, Mike." Jason laughed. "Well, it worked on Doug, didn't it?" I replied. "Yeah, well, that wasn't necessarily fair. My last name is Bailey." "Hey, Mike, is that story true?" Doug asked me. "As far as I know, it is. My father said it is." "Hey, I bet that old oak over there may have been around to see it. Maybe we should go ask it." Jason laughed as he pointed in the direction of an old, gnarled oak tree, about 100 yards or so from camp. "Hey guys, let's go take a walk," Jason stated in drunken inebriation as he stood to his feet. With no clue of what was about to happen, the three of us took off into the darkness of the forest. We walked, drank, and laughed the whole way. After only minutes, we stumbled into a small clearing boasting a thick, dark, gnarled oak tree that must have been living in the forest for centuries. "What are you doing?" I asked Doug as he stumbled toward the old tree. "I'm gonna go water the plants," he replied back in a bit of a slur. "Careful, Dougie. Old Rose might reach out of that tree and tear your pecker off," Jason joked to Doug. Doug zipped up his fly after a quick shake and charged Jason in a playful attempt to tackle him to the ground. The two pushed and shoved each other back and forth while I watched with a stupid smile across my face. Then I heard it. "Shh! Guys, do you hear that?" They didn't listen. Shut up a minute!" With that, the two stopped their shenanigans. In the quiet of night, I could tell they heard it too. A rustling of leaves that sounded like someone moving throughout the forest, just out of sight in the darkness. "Who's there?" I yelled out. The rustling continued. I had no idea what it could be. I remember thinking that maybe it was just some forest-dwelling animal out for a late-night stroll. "Hello?" This time, the noise stopped. Probably just a... "What the fuck was that?" Jason asked while choking on his fear. "It sounded like a little girl," I said. "What the fuck would a little girl be doing out here?" Doug asked. "Well, you remember Mike's story, don't you? Who do you think it is, Mr. Bailey?" That's not funny, man. Serious. Guys, shut up for a second, will you? Just fucking listen. What? Jason asked. I heard something right over there. Right on the other side of that tree. The three of us stared in terror, waiting for something to move in the black. Nothing. No more sounds. No more screaming. The forest had returned to its former silent self. The three of us got a great laugh out of the situation, teasing old Dougie intensely. The three of us decided to walk back to camp to tend to our now surely dying campfire. Dude, you look like you were gonna shit your pants back there, Jason jibed Doug. I was being really quiet because I almost browned myself. Whatever, man. You just Ah! I spun around at the sound of Doug's painful cries. What's wrong? I asked sincerely. He's probably just having a reaction to good beer, instead of that cheap crap he always brings. Jason kept joking. I don't think so, man. Doug, are you alright? I asked again. Yeah, I heard a loud snap as Doug tried to give an explanation, but was unable to determine its origin as of yet. Dude, what the hell? Jason asked, with a lot more concern in his tone now. My arm! My fucking arm! As I watched Doug fall to the ground and his left leg cock to an unnatural angle, I came to a terrifying realization of what was happening to one of my best friends right before my eyes. His bones were being broken by something unseen. Jason and I grabbed our broken friend up off the ground and began to carry him to camp. Doug screaming in pain, the sounds of his bones snapping again and again. I distinctly recall the feeling of Doug's collarbone snapping in two against my arm as I was carrying him. I nearly threw up from the feeling of it. Jason and I were screaming along with him, but in panic. We had to put him down. We were just hurting him too much. Not more than 5 seconds after gently placing Doug on the forest floor, did he get sucked back into the direction we had just come from, back towards that fucking tree. There was nothing there, nothing to pull him, and yet he was quickly dragged away, out of sight, much faster than we could keep up with. We ran back to that old gnarled oak and stopped in total shock. It was dark, so we got really close before we saw anything. We stopped about 5 feet away. Doug was pressed against the tree, seemingly being held in the air against it by something that we could not see. His limbs were broken and twisted and contorted, resembling that of tree limbs. Only the faintest whimpers could be heard coming from Doug. I went to scale the tree and try and get my friend, but when I placed my hand upon it, a large, pale hand with claw-like nails reached around from the side of the tree and grabbed it mere inches from my own. Paralyzed in fear, I watched a terrifying figure step from behind the tree, presenting to me the owner of that monstrous clawed hand. It was wearing long black clothes with a hood over its head like a cloak. Its hideous, large, evil eyes glared at me while boasting a sinister grin on its bony face that looked like tissue paper stretched over a skull beneath. I found myself frozen, unable to move, until I heard the sound of Jason scream behind me. He must have seen it too. By the time I had turned to follow him, he had all but disappeared from sight. I ran after him. I ran from that thing. I fucking ran and left Doug there. I slowed to a stop. Jason long gone. I had to go back. As terrified as I was, I had to. I would be incapable of living with myself if I had just left him behind. Summoning courage I didn't know I had, from a place I didn't know was there. I started back towards that old oak tree. I expected whatever that thing was to start breaking my bones or jump out from every single tree I passed. I didn't just expect it. I knew it would. I don't think I'd ever been so grateful to be wrong. However, I was not rewarded with a pleasant sight. I could faintly hear Doug's whimpers, but was struggling to find him in the black. He wasn't there, only a tree branch extending from the trunk. I examined closer and came to a gruesome truth. I only saw a tree branch that had not been there before. It was not just a branch, however. Doug's body was jutting from the trunk of the old tree like a branch, arms and fingers splitting off to create the appearance of divided tree limbs and twigs. His flesh beneath his clothes seemed darker than usual, making it difficult to recognize him at all. It wasn't until I saw the twitch of an eyeball, recessed into the end of the limb, did I truly believe my eyes. Doug whimpered from behind the bark-like skin that covered the area that likely used to be his mouth. Before I backed away, I watched a single tear drop from his eye and fall to the ground. As I ran away, this time leaving Doug to his fate, I found my mind was a blank slate. I didn't think about what I would say to our parents. I didn't think about how Doug could be alive while clearly being unable to breathe. I don't even think about where Jason had run off to or if he was still alive. I only thought about myself and how much I wanted to avoid suffering Doug's fate. It wasn't until I returned home in the dead of night, silently sneaking into my room, did I sit and ponder everything else. The next day, my parents confronted me regarding my early departure from the woods. I didn't dare tell them this story. They would have locked me away in the loony bin. Jason didn't say anything either. It's not like we worked out a story. In fact, we haven't spoken to each other since that day. I don't know his reasons, but for me, being around him is like wading through a bad memory. I just can't take it. I only surmised Jason's story via the fact that no one treated him like he was crazy or anything either. He likely told everyone the same thing, that we heard something in the woods, like a bear or something, and ran home. Apparently, as far as we were concerned, Doug just never made it back. Sure, the police did an investigation, but never found any trace of him anywhere, except for his torn clothes laying on the forest floor beneath an old, gnarled oak tree. Maybe Jason can live with the guilt, but I can't. I thought maybe it would go away if I avoided the topic altogether, but that hasn't worked. I'm writing this confession, which may double as a suicide note if I do not return. Maybe I can get him back. Maybe he's still alive and I can kill that thing. The way I see it, I have to try. However, as I end this story, I can't help but wonder how many others are a part of that damn tree, trapped in an eternal, contorted madness.
Well, that story's more twisted than a piece of knotty pine, which you might be if you enter those woods, giving you a woody that won't go away. Though I suppose some may welcome that. But don't forget, you're welcome back here next weekend for some more Halloween-flavored horror. And until then, Remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.